Oh, so I'd like to call this meeting to order at 7 o'clock and 49 seconds. We're here to discuss what we can about the school budget in light of all the things we've seen and learned. And I don't really have a set agenda. I just want to see what you guys think. Any data that you've analyzed or come up with, and maybe talk a little bit. It occurred to me that we never have a meeting like this with the school subcommittee of the finance committee. We're always either they come in and that's our meeting, or we go there for their meeting. And so I thought we should have a meeting.
That's a good idea.
Thank you.
I do want to bring up one thing, and that is that I got an email from Pete McManama, who is an ex-member, former member of this August body. And he had reached out to Christine about the fact that although the budget appears to be going up by 5.94%, personnel costs are going up by more than 6%, 6.11%.
I guess we're on the same page there. Because that
What's
was good.
One of the things you were going to say.
Yeah. Okay, that's good though.
Well, and so what I find interesting is that contractual services is up 6.52%. And that's, 400, that's $500,000 of difference on a $6 million, $6.6 million contractual services budget. The personnel is up, what is it? 2.69 million or 6.11%. And then materials and supplies is a relatively modest 2 million, but it's still up 0.25%.
So that's a table I put together after talking to Peter.
Yeah.
I printed 3, so I don't have one, but it's on my computer. But
Okay.
it speaks the same thing that
Right.
you saw, that.
Yep.
And as I told Peter, we all should have saw, meaning we all here. But anyway, go ahead, Brian, sorry.
Well, so then the question is, how do we do this? And as far as I can tell, the only way to do that is with offsetting revenues from some other place, that the overall budget is only 5.94 when the largest part of it is above 6.
Yeah, so I agree. I think Laurie Wheeler and I had a long conversation. Laurie used to chair this subcommittee, and who else I was with? Who was over Adult Beverages, Bill Boudry, I think. But one of the things she said in being in her corporate world was, a brief table with some footnotes. Just give me the 3 slides. She used to present to CEOs, and they just need the facts. They need the executive summary even less. They just need the 4 slides. The bright people in the room will know what to do with it. And that's the conclusion that I continue to go through every year in my head, but I've not been able to get it across to the parties on the other side. This book is a tool for everybody but us, in my opinion. So what she suggested was just what I talked about, and I take no credit for this, but I went and looked around. I knew I saw one, and I have this in front of me, which is the retirement board. So just as you say, Brian, right, take this table, say this is the total increase, less available resources, available funds. This is the net tax levy request.
Right.
This isn't that hard. But they, I believe the board themselves just, they try to keep it under 6% or try to keep it under a certain number or whatever. So that table in the book, which I have a copy of here, which again is a table I always reference, is that other number, this page, those other numbers. So I'd be looking for 2 things.
Page is that in the book?
It says 51, but it's not, on a PDF, but when you get to the numbered pages, it's 51. What I'd like to see is two summaries, tables, spreadsheets showing a year over year, showing the available funds and showing the net tax levy request. And another table showing the preschool.
Just the big number, not the
The preschool number, the available funds at the beginning of the year, expected addition, minus use equals potential summary for end of year, that line item. And then that line item, and then that line item. And everything that's gonna be used, that and including grants and everything else is that other line. Item. Right, again, this isn't hard. But, Laurie said it to me, she says like, I read that book cover to cover, and she was sending me a text. I says, can you please call me? And anyway, we chatted about, it's dragging everything out of the book that we want instead of them just giving us the lousy 6 tables. And you've been doing this a long time, and I've been doing this a long time. We really asked the same question a number of different times.
Look at our hair.
It never seemed to get it. Anyway.
No, I was looking at that chart,
The page?
the table, and I found myself wanting to know not just the differences, but the before and after, so I could see the whole thing. Like, looking at that, it immediately makes me uncomfortable because I don't want to see the data. And I'll also tell you that, after our session, that Saturday, I stuck around for a little bit longer and had a chat with the team from the schools, and they expressed wonderment at our fixation on numbers. And-
Finance committee?
And I said, that's who we are. And they made a valid point in saying,
What
but
did they expect?
what about all the great things we're doing for the kids? And I found myself saying, they don't care. I mean, they do on some level, but what we care about as a body is the numbers and how we get there. And I'll also tell you that, they were concerned about the fact that, like Stefan was asking about specific salaries that had gone up by a seemingly large amount. And there is a conversation around finance committees overstepping their bounds with the school's budget, because they've got an elected board and that's who they answer to, not us. And I looked it up. And in the town charter, it says that we have purview and we can ask any question we like of any department in the town, except who? WMGLD.
Oh, interesting.
There, we got nothing. But for every other department in town, we can ask whatever questions we want, and they're constrained to answer them, so.
I think anybody can ask questions, so that's an odd comment they're making. Yeah, the school committee votes the bottom line, but transparency, I agree we should have a summary, but I think they also are reacting to comments a couple of years ago for the lack of transparency. So I don't know if you caught it, but I think Doug said that they brought a consultant on to do this. I know who the consultant is actually, but
To do,
to deepen this, especially on the revolving funds.
Mm.
So I appreciate that. Okay, I really do, because I'll get into that, but you're right. We need to summarize the whole thing in front of us and make it easy for us.
because the fact is that I think people on this board would spend probably less time digging into minutia if we just had the big numbers that we actually want.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I sent this to my school committee officials and I says,
You like it?
produce a budget as transparent as this, okay?
It's all in there.
Right.
It is.
It is all.
Because it's a big budget and monies can be, I won't say hidden or whatnot, you gotta lay it all out. So I think the business manager did, react to the comments a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
So, and there's certain things that they can't spell out, because my concern, yes, I mean, for labor peace, it was a good contract with the teachers, and that really was a big factor in the personal services at 5.14%. They're also out with 6 bargaining units right now, okay? One of them is the paraprofessionals, which is a major focal point for the Mass Teachers Association.
And why some school districts have gone actually out on strike, mostly for their parents.
And, in summer, we did 3 years ago, we had a big deal with the parals, and they went out and whatnot, and we had to settle with them. But so I'm hoping that they can settle within this budget with those 6 bargaining units. They're not gonna disclose exactly how much is there, but can we stay within this? Or will they be coming back to the town later? So that's my major concern here.
And I think Christine said that she put money for settling her assumptions into the budget. So it's not like it's gonna be a completely unexpected thing.
That's her,
No, she
her
doesn't.
assumptions, and we'll see
where
where
they're
they
gonna
go on that. So, one thing I appreciate with the school department, because there are school departments who took the ESSER money, hired staff on ESSER, and then brought them into the operating budget, and they did not. And I think that, I'm gonna praise them for doing that, being smart enough not to do that.
That is that they sort of kept those one-time funding sources to do things that weren't gonna include long-term liabilities.
Exactly.
Good.
It was a positive move, I think, the $300,000 chargeback, so food services, I think.
And is that, so in past years, that hasn't happened, so the chargebacks? I mean, last year I was the first year as well, so it sounded contentious at that point that there wasn't charge.
One of them they did half. I don't know if it was that one where it was like $150,000. Steve went before school board and made a pitch and a recommendation. I was there to use some of that money to help offset. And it was received poorly, and then eventually they did half, and now you see what you saw. Excuse me, I just don't remember if it was the exact same thing. Half it, now it's full or more. But, and I could look that up, but I don't remember which. It's probably that one, because again, it's fully funded through the federal government or the state, correct? The money for lunch.
I think in the end, when that switches over to being paid for again by the town and or by the kids who are buying the lunches, there's gonna be a period of disruption and pain. Because they're gonna, like, right now, they have staffing for the fact that a lot of kids who never took lunch before are now taking lunch because it's free. And so when it goes back to the old way, they're probably gonna have to lose some staff, and because ostensibly the demand will go down. But that remains to be seen.
Right.
I was impressed with the presentation by the special ed director too. And I know my deputy who I work with has 2 kids in the Wakefield school system and praises the special ed department very much in Wakefield. And that was a good, deep explanation of the special ed. Much deeper than we've seen before.
Right.
And she was terrific.
Yeah.
Did a great job of explaining all.
And I think a great job in explaining how much they try to do to keep it in town. Just because it seems like an uncontrollable, once it's gone, and it could
They're
be
not-
anything.
Yeah, they made it clear they're not likely to come back even
Right.
if we provide more services to make that happen.
Yeah, not an easy lift, but Doug's been doing it, the previous superintendent's been doing it. They've really tried hard to keep as much in-house as they felt they could handle, and be fair to the children, yeah.
Right.
But your earlier point from the school department, school council, sometimes I do think we overstep our bounds. Whether it's minutia, whether it's whatever it is. If they came to me with a Kevin Gill table and they talked to us twice with the Kevin Gill table, would we be any happier? Would we be any sadder? I don't know how we'd be.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I see this book and I see what we asked for last year. They're back and forth with Excels and now I feel like we're almost saying to them like too much.
Go back the other way.
Go back the other way, and then they're gonna do it, and we're gonna say, we need more information. So I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, we're wanting all of the things and we're not really sure what we're,
We want both more information and less information. Do
Right.
that.
yeah, right.
No, you're right on, because every few years, that's almost feels to me like how the pendulum flows
Yeah.
with the people of the interpretation in the room. Yeah, and I had that discussion with Laurie. She's, I know I wanted more, now I want less, literally.
Right, yeah, right.
But that's, it's also fair to say I want both. I want the tie-ups to the line items that I can do my quick analysis on. But I also want the data so I can dig in if I feel like it.
Yeah, like I'm not presenting this to a CEO, but this I'm gonna present to a CEO.
Do you guys have any questions or concerns, or did you see anything that stood out to you?
Percentages were the one, that was the thing I was gonna bring up, that
What's here?
what's here, yeah, just the offset, but
I thought at the meeting, we didn't talk enough about the budget and the money and have a spirited debate. You know, I thought, as usual, the school department is prepared with a deck and take nothing away from any of this, but in the end, I really expected my interpretation of the possibility would be to roll up our sleeves and really dig in and ask questions that may be a little more, further reaching than we should have reached, and just vet the thing out.
But that's on us, right?
Oh, yeah.
If we didn't
Yeah,
come
yeah.
with-
Just give you an observation of the meeting that
We
day.
didn't come with the questions to ask
Yeah, I mean, several people were prepared and
and had some questions.
absolutely, absolutely. And I don't make any interpretation. It's just, the thing with the schools is we go to these meetings, if you go to the facilities and finance meeting, it's never done justice for us. And I've told Doug that, and I told Tom that a couple of years ago. So we got to do something different. This meeting doesn't work for us. We're not,
Which is why we had the meeting.
why we tried the Saturday event. And I liked it. I liked the whole coverage of it and so forth. But anyway, just an observation.
So the chair of the committee needs to do a better job of organizing people to come with questions next time.
I think that was crystal clear what the expectation was, sort of, but
Yeah,
You know, and sometimes that means not saying anything for a while so people can come up with their questions.
yeah,
Instead of filling the space.
quiet in the room is not terrible.
I thought one of the most important things was that Dan and Christine finally understood each other over Dan's point about once the budget is published, you can't go back and change those numbers. And her point about we don't, you know, we can move things between accounts, right? And they were just kind of missing there. I think everybody got clear on that.
and they do. School departments moving up money all the time. All the time.
And that's, and it's their purview to do so.
And, yeah, right.
And that's the challenge when you're looking year over year, right?
Well, but in the end, though, budgeted and final numbers are obviously going to be different, and that's fine, as long as they don't change later.
Yeah, and I thought Dan's analysis of the salaries and the FTEs was, you know, I didn't know what to expect, but it was in step, so to speak, with other activities throughout the town. Meaning increases versus headcounts and different things like that. So, yeah. The salaries, I thought they provide that spreadsheet to us, depending on what level you dive into it. I mean, it is what it is. Contractually obligated increases, and if somebody goes from a bachelor's to a master's, then that's what they're gonna get.
They get a bump. As well they should.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that to me is the crux of the problem, given the percentage of their budget that is personnel. And that is essentially encumbered from the get-go in a known trajectory. There's just not a lot of room. I feel like the thing that they do where they, you know, when somebody retires, they see if they can find another way, or, you know, they're being creative about how they utilize staff and move people around. And I think that's terrific. I feel like the flexibility around chargebacks for the rotating revolving funds, not rotating, appropriate to their usage of facilities or whatever, I thought that,
Yeah.
that's terrific.
Yeah.
And I was very pleased to see when Dan said, yep, doing a good job there.
Yeah.
So that's good. Like, I guess what I'm saying is I don't see a whole lot of room that they have to do much of anything.
Yeah.
If they didn't hire net new staff.
Right,
Right.
right.
And I mean, in the end, the only thing they can do to lower their costs is to get new teachers.
Right, or cut positions.
Or cut staff.
Right.
Yeah, the longevity, you look at that table where the money is by steps and lanes, it's senior people. Right?
Yeah.
They come, they prosper, they stay. Turnover is painful.
Right. I
Absolutely.
mean, it ends up costing more.
Sure.
Right.
Again, I think, what I feel like they were trying to hammer home for us in a couple meetings is what people like in this town are class sizes, and knowing the teachers and having the longevity helps that. So, there's a trade-off there, and it's clear that people are happy with, what they're getting. So, I was interested in the request list of the FTEs that came through in terms of how high that was. And, I mean, in every budget process, right, you shoot high, try to get to the point. But the fact that these requests all came in as something that's needed, and they're doing okay without it. Hoping it's not foreshadowing for what could be coming, right? What's necessary with growth. The big number.
So this year, I think the COLA is the largest of the contract. Goes down to 3.5 next year,
It's 4% this year.
4%, right?
It seems like it would be interesting to do some number crunching on that, but it seems like a longer contract is probably in everybody's best interest because it just takes time and energy to renegotiate all those things.
Well, in declining resources, the union's gonna want a longer contract.
Right.
Say in declining resources?
Yeah, absolutely. One locks situations in.
Lock it in.
You don't know what's gonna happen in the next year, yeah.
The, I think the members of the school committee are much more interested in hearing what we have to say and what we think than X number of years ago when we were involved way back when. I think it's come a long way. I believe they're trying, but every year we run a budget that's gonna require free cash to balance.
Right.
That only goes so far.
That's not gonna go on forever.
So it was really interesting. I can't remember who made this comment, but it might have been Doug. He talked about how a couple of 3 years ago at the tri-board meeting, things were looking very good. Like we were paying into OPEB and we had, the right number, percentage of savings. And, we weren't going up at too high of a rate. And Dan said, so we're in really good shape right now. And that was interpreted as we should be able to pay more. And
By the union, you mean?
by the unions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's really interesting because in my view, he's just saying as it is, right? At that point, things were looking really good. We're in good shape. We're taking care of what we need to take care of. But that doesn't mean that there's a lot of fat on that bone.
Yeah, there was one tri-board meeting where there were negotiations and a pile of the teachers and the negotiating committee came to the meeting.
Oh, really?
forget if they didn't stay the whole meeting, I don't believe, and I can't remember whether they disrupted it, but at some point they had said their say or what, maybe it was public participation, maybe they spoke during public participation, but that had to be 30 of them.
Oh.
First time, last time that anybody from the public goes to the tri-board meeting.
Right.
But, and I think to your point, and I try to work with everybody and everybody tries to work with us. The messaging that we all give before each town meeting is very substantial and it needs to be as accurate as it can be, given all of the unknowns that we're working with and not too rosy and not too scared. It needs to just, this is,
Well, it can be rosy or scared, but it needs to be what we think.
yeah. You know, because based on some assumptions, all of a sudden we weren't so good. Or we were saying the sky was falling and it didn't fall that much, you know, and I've seen both of those activities. And there's a lot of this, when we say the sky is falling and then it doesn't, it's like, you know, why? Why'd you do that? You know, and we fought over nickels instead of giving away quarters or whatever. So, not saying any of it's easy, but I had an interesting conversation with Liz today from town. And we were talking about, I got some information here for free cash activity, because I was trying to understand the free cash activity. She said, how Wakefield does their budgeting is interesting to me and nothing that I'm used to.
Really?
Yeah, we usually work on the revenue side first, and then that dictates the other side. You know, but I said, yeah, I completely agree with you, but it's just not how for the 11 to 12 years I've been on the board or over you've been on the board. It hasn't come across that way.
We don't know what
What you find here is that I'd like to see more revenue projections submitted to the finance committee.
Right.
And that's what I'm used to, is here's our projected revenue when we fit within that budget, you know?
Right.
And, you know, I think you look at things, particular, had some discussions about this, about raising certain permits or fees or whatnot, which you want to do every once in a while, you know, to get out, you know, increase these margins a little bit, you know, they're tight right now, you know? And, there should be a little bit more discussion around that too. You know? So I think.
We often don't know what the revenue is going to be until later in the process.
Well, that's the
Right?
problem, you know,
Well,
we
it's
don't,
state.
I don't, you know, I'm doing this now. I can't project the revenues like at 3/4 in the end of March, you know? I mean, because the state and the big revenues is quarterly anyways, meals tax, the hotel, motel, that type of thing, you know? So now I get a clearer picture of what I think we can raise in the next fiscal year. In terms of also on the levy and with the assessor, with the property tax
Right.
in valuations, you know, new growth in particular. You got some development going on, you want to capture that by June 30th, you know? So you ask your assessor, you know, get out there in the field and come, you know, possibly get some numbers here, you know? So, I think, yeah, I mean, of course, Liz worked with me in Somerville, so that's how we were looking at on the revenue first, and that side, so it's kind of interesting she said that to you.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
But back to the schools.
That's right, yeah.
I don't know. You know, it seems like the finances should support everything that we're looking at so far. There is I'm going to a forecasting meeting tomorrow night.
Yeah.
To sort of tighten that up a little bit as Ed described. Because I work with Dan and I played with some numbers and talked to some people. Because I you know, I feel compelled, if necessary, to talk at town meeting about how good it is or how scary it is. Dan usually does that, and I take nothing away from Dan. But I just feel like if things are gonna go sour and I'm the chair of the finance committee and our role is to speak at the town meeting, prepared to do so. So I was getting a little nervous about the numbers. and that they're peeling back a little bit. We'll see what happens tomorrow's meeting. So, you know, it seems like you can cover where we're headed for this fiscal year. And I think that's a good thing. Will there be any dialogue about cutting budgets in a couple of weeks when we have another meeting, or a week, whenever it is? I don't know. You know, I'm not sure how that'll play out at the next meeting, but
Meaning you're waiting for the revenue forecast that you're gonna look at tomorrow to see what the final gap is estimated to be.
correct.
And then have we and historically gone back and had budgets cut after that process? Or is it just
We,
funded by free cash?
it's generally funded by free cash in the, I think on all of my experience. I don't know, Brian's been on it a little longer than I have, but I'm trying to think. We did some cuts, you know, where we did not agree with, you know, the department heads and Steve, and we put in the book different numbers. And,
Sometimes those get passed in town meeting and sometimes they
sometimes they don't.
Yeah, last time was interesting, you know, with the.
Yeah, and that's what I'd prefer to be fully aware of, but not always the case, and that's the way the process works. But, yeah, again, I think we'll be all right this year. I think the free cash, changes that we've, you know, in 2022, the returns and the, investments netted 5.3 million addition free cash. 2023, 5.5 additional free cash. You know, so call those the glory days, or call them what you want. You know, I keep asking, because Dan and I and we talk about, you know, running out of money and doing this and doing that, but if the math isn't fully supporting that, then that's okay, right? Or whatever, you'll work through that. But the point is, you know, and we'll learn more tomorrow, that's not gonna continue. The, money that came in from investments and from, the health insurance, you know, there was like three key things, and so that's,
We're certainly not getting anything back on health insurance.
Right.
no.
Not sure you're gonna get much from the investments.
Correct. So anyway, the, projections continue to be, you know, need to be as accurate as they can be.
When you said you were getting prepared, I mean, how much? Because I haven't seen it, where it's kind of, last year was okay, right? So as it looks a little bit more dire, how much would you share at town meeting is just what the forecast looks like for next year or for the next couple of years? Because I feel like at this point, we're almost at a crossroads where we've already reduced OPEB, right? So we're getting to the point where we're doing the things that a credit rating agency is gonna say, I'm not sure. And I know, I don't know if there's a lot that we're gonna go out for debt on in the next, say, 3 years, but
Well, there's a big chunk yet to come for the high
for the
school.
high school, right? And I don't know when that's gonna come into play, but
Would be next fiscal year. Steve is saying he's borrowing the entire thing this spring. So you're gonna
when does the
have
rating
full
agency?
interest payment in the next fiscal year.
So, yeah, it seems like it's almost kind of like, hey, not red flag, but maybe like I
Right.
don't know what colors, right? At this point.
Yep. And so that number for, debt service is baked into Dan's table as well, and baked into Kevin's tables as well, if you would. So I'd like to think it's there already. But I don't know that well.
Steve was alluding to using more cash to net down the principal of debt too.
Yeah.
To, well, alleviate the pain of the debt service going forward.
Yep. So Dan does, to answer your question, Dan does a couple of slides where he talks about, you know, free cash. And it's from our table, his table about when free cash is gonna fall. And my concern with that always is that in future years, the estimates on revenues are not accurate as much as accurate I would like to see them.
Sure.
So it makes a dire picture, and then all of a sudden it gets less dire, and so it's this kind of thing.
Then we get accused of being the child who cried wolf.
Exactly. And so,
Well, you know, and I know, and I agree with,
and so the DOR number is good, sorry.
I agree with the way Steve and Kevin estimate revenue, because you are taught to be conservative.
Right.
Because you want to generate free cash,
Correct.
and you never want to be in a situation where you have a revenue deficit. as far as
Correct.
it goes, So.
Yeah.
Free cash is your cushion, so,
Right, and now it's very important for the bond rating, and I would expect capital activities to continue, not 18 months from now, but there's another school to talk about. The DPW building is falling down. I mean, my God. So I don't know what level.
Right.
Dan does a really good job usually. And then if I feel I need to add to that, I'm gonna make sure I tell Dan what I'm thinking of doing and sort of try to get in step about that. That's all.
Yeah.
That was definitely one of the things that Doug was concerned about, was making sure that he knows going into town meeting how it's gonna be.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we'll be able to fully predict that, but
And I do agree that as going in, looking as if we're not aligned with each other for the people there, I'm not sure it gives that feeling that we've done our due diligence when we look so unaligned.
Yeah.
When we've really done our due diligence and the school's done their part, I mean, I agree with the concern.
in the free cash this year as well, so we decreased the OPEB, and getting on an expert, but I learned a long time ago being on this committee, able to fund OPEB and funding OPEB at $1 million or $1.2 million, $1.3 million a year is spectacular.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're gonna go down to 500,000 at the latest numbers and then what? How do you go back up to $1 million?
Well, and I think that's it. I mean, we all say like, oh, the school's the biggest part of the budget, and it is. That decrease flies under the radar because it's
Totally.
not as, it's not a person, because where else are you gonna, I mean, you're not gonna get big bang for your buck unless it's an FTE somewhere, not saying school, but somewhere, right? It's just not as, it just flies right under the radar, but it catches up with you.
Yeah, and it's almost like, I'm sure I can attest to it, you do the easier things first. Then capital is next.
Right.
Exactly.
When you don't have more money, then capital takes the cut.
that's
Right.
And there was a long time when capital was,
We used to do $250,000 of capital,
Oh, really? Wow.
and that was terrible.
Yeah.
And that was, anyway, so to your point, I think, when you look out in time, it depends on how the numbers come out, but it could happen rather quickly.
Mhm.
And then,
well, Dan was saying like it could happen in like 3 or 4 years, right?
yeah,
If we've got a $2 million deficit for this coming
Right.
fiscal year, and that continues apace, we're gonna blow through our savings in a few years.
correct. And that's based on revenue projections of 3% growth or this or that, and so that's where growing the expense side seems to stay right in step, give or take. It's the revenue side that we don't have as accurate as I would like, which then in turn gives us more dire picture than might be necessary. I will tell you this, for $1, I would rather spend less money on all of it and have less taxes and less spending, but that's just my cloak that I carry, but you don't hear that out of me a lot at these types of meetings. It's just, anyway. If there are a lot of questions and a lot of dialogue about the schools, we'll see what happens at the full meeting. That's next week, I think, or the week after. Stefan had some comments, right, Brian, that from the meeting, I printed some notes that he had taken.
Sure. Do you wanna run through those?
School agrees the budget. School agrees to budget what is known. Baseline item figures as reviewed by FinCom must remain static and stable as baseline. We talked about year over year.
Once it's voted, don't change the original budgeted number.
Right. Revolving account balances are gonna be reduced over time as allowed to by law over a 4-year period.
And this, just to be clear, the school side also talked about the fact that they don't want those revolving accounts to go down, draw down to zero because they need to fund whatever it is that they're designed to fund. That's a fair point.
Yeah, they need some operating capital, 3 months is the standard.
Yeah.
They were right on that, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, if they, if their, revolving account is much larger than that, though,
Right,
drawing it down to 3 months and getting paid by families and building it up year over year to have the revolving account,
Right.
that doesn't bother me too much, unless something
Well, this-
drastically changed, right?
Month thing was an interesting insight, which I was unaware of.
you gotta pay staff.
Absolutely, you gotta have capital.
Right,
yeah,
right. You can't go to zero.
To take care of business. Which is why we all have 12 months of salary saved up, right?
Yeah, that's what they told us.
That's what they said.
What else did he have on there? I can't remember.
Yeah, just jotting that down. Request made by FinCom year-over-year comparison by labor unit. An accounting of the impact to tax levy for all federal grant funds that may disappear.
Just so we know.
Request a more granular and time phase details surrounding contractual services of the FY 25 budget. List of prepaid services made in current fiscal year expected to expense in future years. And then request a forecast of best their knowledge of the amount of money that will be returned to the general fund at the conclusion of FY 25.
So that's another interesting point where folks on the school committee side have expressed the opinion that the town voted the budget because they're able to move money around between accounts. In the end, they've got plenty of places to spend that money and they don't see a reason therefore to give money back.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it several times from the school department, school council, we're doing the best for the children. We're doing the best for the children. So using that money is the best for the children. And we would disagree. At least FinCom would disagree. So yes, you're doing your part. But to the extent that, you've got a small sum left over, you've already taken care of the kids. Like what do you need it for? That's a debate.
Right.
It is.
And they obviously by law can and do prepay sped.
But that's just 3 months, right?
3 months, yes, yeah.
But that's a big number.
Of course, it can be,
Yeah.
It makes sense to do so depending upon,
They also kind of made it clear that it was to cover the summer. Like they don't necessarily prepay 3 months all the time, but just to cover
Yeah.
the summer.
well, I usually see it done, like in June, for the 3 months after that, they're rushing to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if I have the number. It was a pretty big number last year or the year before. Yeah, but didn't they say you could carry over 1 year of sped into the next year? Oh, no, that's is that the repayment, right?
That's the circuit breaker.
Circuit
breaker.
Circuit carryover 1 year to the next fiscal year.
Yeah. So then us on the FinCom look at that as unused money from this year that they move forward.
They can move forward the allocation for the prior year, the amount.
Right.
Like, they just was meeting with them today, it's 3.8, they're gonna move over to fiscal 206 in Somerville, that's what was allocated for circuit breaker.
So where do they get, how does the money, it's like, did they have an extra 3.6? This has sort of been my. Well, they get analysis of it. I thought you needed that.
Well, because special ed, that's chapter 70, right?
Yes,
Special ed is variable.
No, understood. I just.
But how does that functionally work though?
well, I mean, I think the way they presented it was very good. I mean, you gotta look at what you can carry over versus what you're gonna prepay and what you're allocating in your local budget, you know, you gotta manage this thing.
It gets viewed by us, many else on the FinCom as a large sum of money that they're encumbering that,
Right.
boy, that doesn't seem fair. That's the message I've heard many years in a row.
Right.
I've heard it explained very well by a number of people, but there's still, finance committee people that just find that be a little much.
Yeah.
But it's within the rights of the law. But again, if you're able to move over 1 million, so you didn't need it this year, but you're moving it over,
You're moving it over,
I'm confused. I'm confused. It's like,
that, yeah.
so you said the school sped budget was 3 million. You got 2 from the feds and 1 million from tax levy, and that's all going okay, and there's 3 million to spend. But I'm moving over what I was allocated for this year, another 1 million to put back over there, like
Moving over what you expect to spend in the succeeding fiscal year, and that's
In
how
the
we have to be looking at it. you
yeah,
know?
I guess the point is it started at some point, and when it's in a run rate, it works, right? Because you're always moving. You bring an extra new million in, then you move an extra old million out, again, hypothetically. So it's just this
Right.
continuous thing.
Right.
Someplace, somewhere it started, where they were able to have money to do that, though, correct? You think?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
But if they
Also here in the,
for a given year, if they didn't spend it,
Yep.
they can put it into next year.
Yep.
Now we're going.
Stop the evolution.
you also have a safety valve here. You have a stabilization fund, spend stabilization.
Right.
fund.
350,000.
Towns or the one we set up for special ed?
Town has a special ed stabilization.
That's the same.
It's a separate, that's a reserve,
Correct.
which you can legitimately count for the bond rating agencies too.
Yeah, it's all part of the reserve, the free cash, the available,
Reserves, yeah.
the 10%. So,
Who designates that for like, does it have to be appropriated?
town meeting. Request, article, town meeting. Then an expectation to replenish it. And we have not replenished it. I think it was either 300 or 350, and it's below that number. Not like substantial, but it is below that.
If we took their million left over and replenished that fund. I mean, in essence, what,
Yeah, you could do that. I mean, you
This is
literally
the thing. This is
could
where
appropriate that to reserves. Yeah, you could if you wanted to do that.
I mean, honestly, if we're looking at reserves dipping below a certain point, and that counts, and you can use that money, I think your idea is genius. I mean, I don't know.
so
I mean,
I mean, it's very intuitive.
Yeah,
Try to sell it.
yeah, I mean,
that's the other side.
what we do is if we have a contingency account for collective bargaining. So if these labor negotiations don't consummate during the fiscal year, before June 30, we're appropriating that unused money into a stabilization fund to hold, which bolsters your reserves, and it's there for potential settlements down the line, you know?
Right. So that's another reserve item for you.
Right, and we always take a portion of free cash.
Yeah.
So go to reserves,
Right.
Yeah.
You're taking essentially like you're encumbering that for, say, like a retro back for anything that's settled.
So we look at the
can just-
stabilization fund to pay the retro the back years.
Okay.
And,
because we're not getting the contract this year, we're out of contract, and once we do, they're gonna want it back to.
but what it does for you from the balance sheet is increases your reserves,
So it looks good.
It looks good.
real good.
It's truly just, it's encumbered money, but not, I mean, from a balance sheet perspective, it just looks like it's in your stabilization fund.
Yeah, it's fund equity. So I think Steve was, when we talked about the 10%, he says, we might have to throw a little free cash into that stabilization fund, just to
Right.
get it up,
I'm just looking real quick. I get the spreadsheet, but it's not jumping out at me what the sped stabilization number is.
So, last night I participated in the, debate amongst the treasury candidates for this upcoming election. And in preparation for that, I looked through a whole bunch of documentation that Kevin and Steve and others provided about what that job does. And I had no idea. Because when we talk about the budget, it's just to employees,
Bing, bing.
done.
Very, very important position. This is highly unusual that it be elected. In most communities, in Massachusetts, an appointed professional position. So when we're talking about something like the high school, it's the treasurer is providing the debt service payments and borrowing money. And
And does payroll and all these things and has control over all of the town's bank accounts.
yeah, in most communities, the treasurer handles payroll, not all. Some is under auditing, some is under HR, but that's a very it's unusual to elect that position. Let me put it that way, you know.
That point was made.
That point was made, yeah.
Not so much that it was unusual, but just
Me,
Somerville's appointed?
most are appointed, yeah. The treasurer answers to me as the finance director, yeah.
Do you feel like it should?
Huh?
That makes sense.
Well, yes, I think the DOR recommends that it be appointed, you know, a professionally appointed position. So this would have been the time with the retirement of the current treasurer to maybe change that, but you know, because what do? You don't want to necessarily unseat somebody who's in there, you know? That isn't to say that there aren't some qualified candidates running, you know,
no, they were all
yeah, you know, I've looked at.
pretty darn qualified in different ways.
Yeah.
Stabilization is like 3.2 million.
Current balance.
Yeah, but that's not. I don't see it broken out for the sped portion of that. So there was a discussion, during the public review of the school budget. One person from the public was there.
This is at town council.
No,
No, at the school,
the school,
committees,
school committee public, they do
their own budget hearing.
the budget hearing for the public participation.
Required by law, yeah.
Right. And nobody usually comes, and one person did come. And they made a number of different points, including making sure that if our subcommittee has meetings with them, there should be minutes and they should be posted. Because it's a public meeting. And, you know, we attend their meeting, so they're supposed to do the minutes. That being said, one thing this group has not done is presented a summary to the finance committee for this budget, like ever. And I'm not telling anybody, you know, telling you have to do this. We bring the schools in twice for the purposes of vetting and then a second time. And we've never held our own meetings to the extent that, you know, when I do my DPW meeting, it's a meeting and I do a little summary and stuff like that. So it's just dysfunctional compared to most of the other budgets. So whatever that's worth. And the person was polite about it, but they were looking for certain things and they couldn't find them.
So did they specifically mention our group meeting with their group and not publishing meeting minutes?
They asked if the finance committee had a subcommittee for the schools. And Doug said yes, and I was on the meeting and I didn't have to speak or anything like that. And she said, well, I can't find any of those meeting minutes. I find other subcommittee meeting minutes for the DPW or the police and this.
Well, I think that's the point I was making in having this meeting, is that we never have this meeting.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, just, again, not another duty is assigned. It was just, I was amazed by it and sort of taken back by it. They're not wrong. And now it's the biggest,
It's a good observation,
it's the
right?
biggest budget, and our subcommittee doesn't present something to the rest of our team. And conversely, I felt the Saturday thing did leaps and bounds compared to what we've done in previous years.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for getting that ball rolling.
Not gonna hurt you.
Like hiring IBM. Never get fired for that.
Right, right. Might not be able to pay for it, but. Yeah, I thought your point on the ESSER money was a great observation. That was one of my comment notes when I read this over, that, you know, they didn't hire teachers and things like that with the money. I don't know how the Stoneham made out. Together they were doing a $13 million override, I think. I haven't heard. I could ask Steve.
I read that they are, they're being, the one option for them is to close their library to try and save money.
That's right on Main Street too, right? Yeah, I went in there once.
And there was back and forth about once you close the library, it's hard to get back and get accredited again
Oh, yeah.
and expensive.
Drastic.
Yikes.
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't have a lot of history in it, but you know, when you do an override for operating expenses, how big are these numbers? You know, we do an override in town for my whole life in town. It's been for a school, you know, so it's 90 million, it's 180 million. It's like a big number. Do you know, Ed?
Well, that's a
Those are debt exclusions,
Oh,
not
sorry.
override.
Sorry, bad choice of words.
Debt exclusion, you don't actually have to put a number in the ballot question.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta tell,
You gotta
tell the
identify what-
community what it is.
Yeah.
With an override, you do.
Yeah.
So when it's a 13,
Override-
it's an operating budget.
Budget, and you're right. So is 13 million a lot of money for an override? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say so.
I'm pretty sure it was 13. It was definitely double.
13 for Stonium?
I think so.
That's
I
huge.
think so. I have an email somewhere.
I had heard that they had run into trouble with their school, like it's partially, perhaps even mostly built, but they're having trouble getting it completed.
And there are other communities considering operating overrides as well.
Well, you get Melrose right next door too, you know?
Correct. I don't know what that number is, but
My wife's a teacher, so we always hear about the other communities where teachers are going on strike for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Because they talk.
Let me know if they're gonna do that in Somerville, okay?
if you hear anything,
Yeah, if you hear anything, let me know.
You'll be the first.
I feel like it's a slippery slope. Once one town does it, it just becomes, it feels like easier. I mean, it's not an easy decision, but
No.
I mean, we're dealing with the same thing at the hospital. It's.
Yeah.
That word's thrown around a lot more than it's been in a while
to cover operating.
for negotiations to strike. It's,
Oh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to the, I mean, I know for like, say, DPW, we meet with the department and we go over the budget in more detail. And for the schools, when we meet with the schools, it's with a subcommittee of the school committee. Is that because they have a different governing body? Is that why that's combined that way? Versus us meeting directly with that department? Is that kind of the intent of those meetings?
Well, I mean, we meet with Doug as well, right? I mean,
Right,
he's essentially the department head, right?
right, but it's with the, the other ones are just a little bit different in terms of like, for DPW, we just go into Joe's office, it's Joe, it's not anyone else, but I mean, I recognize that they have a different governing body, so I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's
There,
exactly why. I think the department heads, meaning say Doug and Christine, want their finance people there when we're there. That's always been my experience,
okay,
because they have a subcommittee. Tom is on the finance subcommittee and Steve Engel is on the finance subcommittee and the third, so they have their own subcommittee, because again, they have their body of 7, I think it is, and they all have various assignments, personnel, finance, so I think it's a decision. I'm trying to think back to the superintendent, the last superintendent, I think Tom Markham was in the room then, and that was a while ago, but that,
would it make sense too, though, to have, I mean, that we go to their scheduled meetings, would it make sense for us to invite them to a subcommittee meeting with Doug, Christine, and then whomever on the subcommittee that they want to specifically do what we do with the other departments, kind of shift it, that we're not going to their meetings, but we're doing that meeting, or have
That
you
was the
tried?
purpose of the Saturday get together.
Right. I just think that was,
It had not been done before.
no, I thought it was awesome. I thought it was great to have everyone.
It's a great observation, because I said it early on, I don't think the meetings we attend have the value that we should look towards, to get, you know, if you're on the police department or whatever, it may only be a meeting or two, but it covers things that you wanna look at, you know, but you need to get the thing,
Right.
be prepared, and then hold the meeting. I agree with you.
Yeah, I feel like that was great, and I think it was helpful for the entire finance committee to hear everything. But I think on a go-forward basis, to have the same sort of cadence so that there is a report out, because I feel like I've only been to a couple of those meetings at the school department, but I don't feel like there's a lot to report out to the finance committee as a whole from those meetings. So maybe just flip the script a little bit and have
Yep.
meetings scheduled.
Like this, but invite Doug and Christine.
And
Whoever
whomever,
they choose.
and if they want their subcommittee members to come too, but it's our meeting that we're inviting them to review specifically this budget document, right? I mean, obviously not for this year, but just in the future, maybe. So that there is a report out, there are minutes available.
Yeah, I should take it back. I do think many years ago, there were some minutes submitted. Because we would do a couple of meetings, we would get the early projections, and we'd let the finance committee know what we heard about the early projections, and then there'd be three meetings that we'd try to get to and get information of better value each time.
I just don't know if that Saturday meeting, I mean, again, I thought it was fantastic the way that it was set up. I'm not sure, are they open to that every year, or is that was like, hey, let's kick it off and try to get aligned type meeting? You know what I mean? I would hope it could be every year, but
I mean, it's our committee, so subcommittee, we can do what we want to do.
Yeah, I think I would entertain the idea of trying to do just us first, and then a bigger one with the bigger group, because you know, we would always hear the wish list, should have all the FTEs in it and things like that, and we would report some of that back to the broader group, but it's early information at that point, so.
There was also something about how those meetings that we go to of the subcommittee with Doug in his conference room, they don't do minutes for him. I don't remember what the rationale was, but it's like there's no deliberation going on or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what the lady brought up at the public. Yeah. Stoneham is 14.6 override.
Oh.
We don't want to get there.
No.
it's a cautionary tale.
No, and I think, I mean, I was looking back at the school numbers, going back to the early aughts, and, you know, there were several budgets that were decreases year over year.
Right.
And, for the school committee, for the school's budget specifically. And, you know, that clearly meant people were like, oh, I have to assume.
Don't know.
I also don't.
Assuming like during the recession, 2010, 11. I would assume.
In 11, actually in 12, they also,
Yeah,
fiscal year 12, they were down 67 grand from the year before. So not appreciably, but still down. What's interesting is that for the last 4 years, it's been 417, 417, 55, and 5.9 for their overall budget. And the last time we had a really big number was in 2016, where it was 11.39%.
7.39%, really.
The increase the year before had been 6.18% or 1.7 million bucks. And then in 2016, it was 3.55 million more. I'm trying to remember what was going on then, and I don't.
That was Superintendent Reich. And I'm gonna say they opened the early childhood or the pre and post or did something substantial that was not, had not been working in the town, had not happened in the town. And there was a presentation, you know, put forward for that, and we all agreed to it and agreed that next year would only be 3.
And it was 399.
That's been the rub ever since. We gave you the big number and you never held up your end of the bargain. That's what
Oh.
people in the room would tell you.
Right, we had a couple of years after that where people kept saying, hey, wait a minute.
You said, you said. Ask Doug Lyons about that. Don't ever bring that up again. Wasn't me. But they started a program and it was very successful and it did very well. And sorry, I don't have all the particulars, but
It was probably going to all full-day kindergarten. So
I think you're probably right. I think that's what it was. Full day kindergarten, you know, 3 full-day kindergarten for all. And then the gentleman left and he went and worked in Salem like a year or 2 later.
no, he went to Springfield.
Where he went?
And he took it over. It was like, it was in receivership by the state,
Oh, I thought he ended up in Salem.
I think,
We had a very revolving door.
for a few years. And then we had a temporary guy, right?
Yes, that's right. A retiree of sorts. Pretty good.
All right, so any thoughts going forward, recommendations? What do we think we should do for this year's budget? Like, are you guys good?
I want to see the summary tables that I spoke about at the beginning. I can put a framework together if you'd like, but I just think, I don't know, pull it from the book myself and present it to you guys and this.
Doug suggested that Adobe Professional is like 20 bucks. It's actually 20 bucks a month, not $20. And I tried it with one of those. I did the free 1 week or 1 month or whatever it is. And I tried it with one of the budget books and it doesn't work, or at least it didn't work as I was able to pull it off.
Yeah. And again, they give us some Excel spreadsheets, but not everything that we think we want or need, but
So that's the other thing. I mean, my point is, all this data clearly came from a report or a spreadsheet of some kind. Just give me that. And what they say in response is that there are macros in there and things. And, you know, copy, paste value.
didn't you used to teach Excel?
I did.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And
You want to talk about an expert?
you don't have to worry about the macros at that point. If those are the numbers, copy them, paste them
Yeah.
as values, and then we just get the numbers, not the macros, and get what we want. Or my guess is that we could probably have Munis set up to give us what we actually want.
And that's been said a number of times.
I don't know Munis,
I've
but
been in Munis a few times, but I'm not,
we didn't get along.
basically.
But our new accountant apparently is really good at Munis.
She's excellent at Munis. There's a lot of reports you can run in Munis. Just need to know how to do it, you know, so, I mean, she's someone we could request various reports from. I think she could generate that, yeah.
So that's been my thing for years is how hard can it be to just give us the data? And then if we disagree, you know, Christine's point is now there's this other data floating around. I don't know, maybe you change the numbers and now we look bad. And that's fine. You know, your data is the source of truth, no problem. But this at least gives us an opportunity to play. And we need that. It's what we do.
Hmm.
As I think Lori pointed out, we're all nerds at heart.
Did you bring that up?
She's right.
All right.
Ed, any thoughts?
I think, it's all going to experience. You're right. I think we're going to get the summary table in front of us. I'm generally okay. A lot of my questions got answered at the event.
On that Saturday.
Yeah. No, I hope this will be a regular occurrence. Dialogue was great.
Yeah,
All good.
yeah. That's what they said.
Interestingly enough, talking with some of the people who were there last night at WCAT, somebody actually said something along the lines of, we appear to have a reputation for crying wolf, and then the wolf never shows up. And, as I think about that, when talking about these big numbers and the so many things that are variable and over which we have no control, of course, it's going to be sometimes off. It seems like it's a prudent course of action, to your point earlier, to be conservative about it so that we don't end up on a cliff of our own making.
Exactly.
So there's that, but I think maybe this idea of focusing more on the revenue, getting a better handle on that earlier in the process could help us.
Yeah.
I don't know how we do that, but
Well, I think we requested. I mean, we talked about Munis as revenue reports you could run in Munis on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
And I actually I post them on my website in Somerville if the public wants to see it, And
you post ours.
I think we could be more transparent in that regard, Should. But it's interesting to see the revenue trends, Of course, Dan is looking at them in his forecast, the meals tax, I'm just noticing for me it's, maybe it's the economy, but that's not, we got a 1% increase at best, from year to year. And that says to me, it's the economy. People aren't going out eating as much and that type of thing, Whereas several years ago it was double digits, so.
It has nothing to do with the fact that a bowl of chowder at Legal Seafoods is now $18
Yeah.
or whatever it is.
That's the one I drive right by.
But some of these a lot of these revenues are tied to the economy, and
Yeah.
it's interesting to see the trends, I think with the building permits in particular, all this development going on in the town, I think you look at the fees for building permits and maybe jack them up a little bit, get a little bit more revenue in.
Yeah, I think some things out of Munis, like on the, what's the term I'm looking for, like on a measurement basis on the cost per pupil, for the budget. How does that measure up with Big Five communities in Middlesex, I guess?
Mhm.
And there's three other metrics probably that would present the picture.
That's not in there, is it?
No. The metrics,
DOR thing?
Well, DESI will have all that.
Desi will have.
DESI has.
DESI's got a very robust website. I'm sure you've seen it. Easily look that up and run some.
I just think if there's a story to be told there, and I was part of the finance committee, I'd tell the story. We're only in we're not in the top quartile of spending. We're only in the lower third quartile. So we're spending less per student and everybody's content with our product and just measurements like that.
Yeah.
There are some people on the committee that are pretty familiar with that. I am not, but both of those websites, but.
Well, the DESI website is.
And those are public access, right?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
Special ed, English as a second language, all that type of stuff is there. Number of pupils and that. And because school departments are required to submit a lot of detailed information to DESI. And it's in their end of the year report. It's a real process. So they've got a lot of data. They have the school department, because they have to submit that, And look at the trends in that too, with the number of, English as a second language students, they're talking about that growing here. higher amount of low income kids, that type of thing, you know, it's, those are things we, you know, end up spending more money on, you know. Right.
And I think we hear about those anecdotally a lot when we have the conversations with the schools, but to your point, not necessarily seeing the data that's associated with, the numbers aren't gonna lie. So yeah, we might have an increase, but is it 10%? Is it 4%? Is it 20%? I mean, I think that is important. The other thing that kind of has been sitting in the back of my mind is, I know like the school lunch is paid for by the state. But is it covering our cost for that? Is that something that I had to leave early on?
I don't think it covers all of it.
Yeah, so it's just, are we staying in lockstep saying, oh, it's reimbursed by the state? With rising costs of food, like I'm not sure the state's gonna be willing to just hand over more money because rising costs are coming down.
No, I think if anything, they're gonna drop that program.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I think Steve, made a point of talking about that, and it's we're reimbursed X and it cost us Y, very straightforward to what your point was.
Yeah,
I just don't remember.
But I'm not sure that the cafeteria program was ever designed or meant to run at a profit, was it?
no, but I mean, if it's at a loss, which is okay, if we're subsidizing it, is it measured and is it growing, right? Like, and
Right.
the fear of that program going away, and then you have exorbitant costs because you were getting reimbursed for it. It's just something that hangs right here in the back of my mind a little bit.
Yeah, so for FY 26, they're talking about reimbursements of 1.7, total expenses of 2.0.
Yeah.
So 300 off. Plus or minus.
But just in general, I mean,
So funny.
everything's going on. How much do we account for?
Yeah, and there's a complaint. I just know that it was spoken about that what they're getting reimbursed for per lunch is too low. I think maybe Steve said it or somebody said it, but
It's so funny how we all have our own way of looking at the data. I sent Pete my little thing from fiscal year 21 to 26, broken out personnel, contractual services, materials and supplies differences, dollar differences, percent differences, all nicely organized. And he said, yeah, I'll send you my thing. Like he just wasn't going to look at mine, and he sent his thing, and it's all the same data, just in different order and organized differently. But I think that's the point, right? I think everybody on this board probably has their own way of thinking about how to organize things. Certainly, Kevin's pages are a constant for the most part.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really interesting.
Well, it's interesting because if we had Excel, we could all do it our own way for how our brains work, but it's good insight to see how other people's brains work when you see it that way.
It just kills me to copy and paste data out of PDF and try and get it into a
Yeah.
spreadsheet. I actually, today I was taking it out of PDF, putting it into Word, doing a find and replace to get tabs in between the data so that I could then paste it into Excel and it would all work properly.
I'd have been faster to type the numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I ended up doing for one of the.
Right. And then I'm gonna fat finger one of the
Of
numbers.
course, that, you don't give us the spreadsheet, what's gonna happen? All right,
Word.
would we say we're in support of the budget as is presented? I am.
I am.
I am.
Good. So we can report back to the committee at large.
Mhm.
The subcommittee has deliberated.
Bingo.
So question. Do you guys, are you familiar with the level of detail to put into a minutes? Like, because Steve writes most of the minutes for our big meetings, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I assume there's an art to it.
there is, I would look at, or I can provide you the police department budget, for example, or the fire department budget, or, in my case with the DPW, he gives a very good summary memo that I then just feed off of, regurgitate its points, and it's easier than you might think, but, I could certainly, I've got some old ones, you know, that bounce over to you. But yeah, so the format is, we talked about this, we talked about that, we had discussion on this, there's no agree, disagree. It's really just summary discussion is how I look at most of the minutes. At least that's what I think. Mm-hmm. All right,
I will entertain a motion.
motion to adjourn.